Okay, here we go. Sucio Talk Podcast. We are at Lindsay Hoops' Hoops Vineyard out here in somewhere between Yountville and Napa. I really don't know. This is like no man's land, bro. How are you? I'm sitting with Michael Sinowitz, writer of the book Finding Meaning in Wine, a U.S. blend right there. When did you release this book?
It came out in August of 23.
August of 23. Okay.
Yeah.
And how long have you been working on this project?
Oh, I actually probably started somewhere around 2014. It took a while.
Got it. And I've only talked to one author before this. How do you even get it in your head that you need to write this book? Like, who tells you that? Is it yourself, or are you like having some spiritual, realization that you need to put forth this body of work?
I've written 2 books, and in both cases, they started out being something I was really interested in. Mm-hmm. And I started writing, and I was trying to write an essay. Mm-hmm. And then in both cases, I realized that it was a book when the essay became so ridiculously long that I was already needing to make it into 2 essays. And then that's sort of how this began, is like the first and second chapter were essentially one essay. And I was like, there's too much here. And then it became, and then in my head, like the other pieces sort of fell into place about what I wanted to write about. Yeah. And then you have a book, and it's like one of those things where you just keep kind of adding on to that process. Mm-hmm. But it has to be something that just keeps where you just find yourself thinking about it all the time, because you want to get it out onto paper in some ways. And because it just takes so long to kind of, get through the process that you want to be engaged the whole time. And so, I've written essays that don't become books, but in this case, it was the process of just beginning. And I knew, in this case, like one of the things that I wanted to do was interview winemakers. And as soon as I started doing that, like I was just so fascinated by the conversations I was having that I just I knew that I wanted to keep doing this and to meet more people and have more of these kind of conversations and see if I could sort of get them together into a book in some ways.
Right. Okay, it makes a lot of sense. Do you? When do you know that the book is done, though? Right? When is the work of art done? The last brushstroke. How do you know?
That's a good question. To be honest, it's never done. It's published. It's not done. I did some readings this week. And I'll be like, I would,
shit.
I'd like, or like, how did the copy editor miss this? But there's a way in which I feel like, you at some point you just have to stop. If you're the type of person that is always revising and things like that, you just have to let it end in a way. I've heard the same thing from novelists and things like that, where it's just you just keep. If you're the type of person that keeps revising, I think there's a poem that I used to teach that I remember hearing the poet revise it 200 times. You just at some point you have to let it go, and it's gonna be out there, and at that point you can't control it anymore. But that's part of it when you're writing, is there's that sense of it's your control, you're in control of it, you're trying to make it as perfect as you can. Yeah. And at some point you have to let it go. In terms of this, it was also about this was the range of things I wanted to talk about in some ways. And I kind of got there. And that was part of it. Also letting me know, okay, I know what the chapters are going to be. And then it's just the point of have I said everything I want to say? And have I gotten all the research that I wanted done to be able to sort of talk about the things I wanted to talk about? But in the actual writing, it's just hard sometimes to let it go. Mm-hmm. It's just, like I said.
Do you have essays that haunt you, that you're like, fuck?
No, I was very lucky. So I'm a professor, and a lot of a lot of times the thing you write went to get your PhD as a dissertation, which is essentially like a book, but it's an apprentice book. It's like the thing you're doing when you're learning how to write a book.
Right.
And I was very lucky in the sense that when at the school I was at, it's a small liberal arts college, so it doesn't have the same kind of pressure for publishing that I was able to like say, I don't want to publish this. Like that would have been the thing. I feel like if I had pushed that through and found a publisher and all that, I'd regret that, you know. I'm very glad I didn't publish that.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so I was lucky in being in the environment that I was in that I didn't feel like I had to publish something that was apprentice work, you know, in some way. It's like, you know, it's like some winemakers, you know, the very first thing they bottle, they don't want to sell it, you know. It's basically the same kind of thing for me, you know, like, you know, okay, I learned how to write something that long, but I didn't feel like it was, you know, dissertations are weird. You have like 5 people telling you what to do. Yeah. And so like, it's not really reflective always of your own voice and your own ideas. And I wanted the stuff that was out there to be sort of my voice in some ways. So, so I don't have any regrets about the stuff I have published, but, except for occasional sentences, but that would have been the answer to that if that had gone out there.
Gotcha. Do you submit your work to colleagues or sort of like scientists do for peer reviews and things like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, this book also, like, it was interesting, the peer review process for this, which was, because this is a pretty odd book, certainly to go through an academic press. And so they had people that reviewed it were from all different sort of fields. You can tell from the response, you get it blindly back, you know, that doesn't say who their names are, but sometimes they kind of like, you know, someone's like, I'm at Yale, you know, or whatever, but I could tell they were from different fields. So you're getting this kind of different points of view on the work that you're doing. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of the way it tends to go.
What's that process called? Is that just
it's peer review is like you say, and it's blind. I mean, what they call it is like blind. It's funny because I wrote about blind tasting. It's called blind submission. So they don't know who wrote it, and they're just given the manuscript, and they're giving, like at this particular press, they give them a very detailed list of questions they want them to respond to. Yeah, and then the editors so they also, the last question is, do you recommend publishing it? And then the editors go through this process of deciding whether or not it works for them, how they feel about the responses. So usually they'll ask you like, this came up, are you willing to make these changes that they've asked you to do? And that's sort of how it goes. I mean, it can go different ways. Like you can be utterly rejected. You can be rejected, but if you make these significant changes, we'll look at it again. Yeah. Or we'll publish it if you make these changes. And then the very rarest one is like,
we are not doing this.
Yeah. Well, no, the rarest one is, it's perfect. We'll take it as it is. That's the rarest. No, the most common one is, get out of here. Yes, absolutely.
I love that.
And, you know, that takes all kinds of forms. Yeah. You know, like, this just doesn't fit our approach, you know, or things along those lines.
They figured out a way to let you down easy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Which often makes it seem like you have no idea if they've actually read what you've submitted. So right. But yeah, that's the basic sort of, that's the academic world of writing more than anything else.
Okay, and then Mike, we're gonna take it all the way back. Where were you born?
I was born on Long Island in New York.
Long Island in New York. Yes. Okay, got it. What'd your parents do?
My mom was a nurse and my dad was an engineer at Grumman, the big aerospace.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Which was an interesting, like, to have, you know, I could never go visit my father at work because the security wouldn't let you go in and stuff like that. But yeah, that was, so both backgrounds are pretty different than what I ended up doing.
Okay. Did they have any influence on what they wanted you to do? Or were they just like, work hard, finish school?
I think I was fairly rebellious in certain kinds of ways. Like I tended to go my own way.
Sinowitz.
Yeah.
I get it, Mike.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, generally speaking, like there was never like, if you become an English major, we're gonna disown you or anything along those lines. But you know, I feel like the funny thing is, like, so my son's very mathematical.
Okay.
My dad was an engineer.
Okay.
My father-in-law was an engineer. And I feel like I'm always around those kinds of folks. So I think for a humanities, literature, film, you know, person who's into music or things like that, that I have some of that in me. So that's probably where, you know, like there's a certain amount of like interest in logic, I guess I would say, more than maybe numbers, but there's some of that in there. But yeah, I mean, they were just always willing to support me, I guess, is more than anything else.
Okay.
Like, you know, and that's they never imagined, like, you know, being a college professor or what that life would be like. I mean, that's different from their experiences growing up. Like they went to college, but they were first generation college from their families and things like that. And, you know, we don't have to go very far back for, like, you know, our immigrant families and things like that. So you know, so they're not thinking of like academia in that kind of way.
Got it. And then you're reading a lot when you're younger, I guess. You know, you're like really into literature. Is that?
Yeah. I mean, I did read a lot. I probably read more like sci-fi, fantasy, like comic books and things like that than classics. But yes, I was a reader for sure.
Gotcha. What was your favorite sci-fi series?
That's a good question. I mean, I liked.
Because a lot of people obviously love Dune and they love Star Wars, right? But now I'm hearing, and thank God for the internet, that these things are related. They're in the same sort of world.
Yeah,
you know.
It was funny because, like, so my son is of the age, he loved the first Dune movie. So I went back and reread that. I hadn't read that since I was in high school.
Yeah.
And I was actually, like, I was impressed. It was, you know, I still liked it. And he's actually making his way through it now and stuff like that. Loved the second one and stuff. So, I mean, I did like Dune. I liked when I was a kid, I liked the Lord of the Rings. I liked a lot of the knockoff series of those and things like that. And, you know, I used to collect like comic books. Like I loved the X-Men when I was growing up, which was sort of like, it's sort of funny to watch how popular they've become.
Who's your favorite X-Men?
It's a kind of cliche answer, but probably Wolverine.
Of course, he's the best. You know, you know who gets no respect is Cyclops. He gets no respect. He literally has like the most powerful power out of all of them, and they never make a movie about that guy. You know what I'm saying?
But he can't. I always thought it was funny that he can shoot lasers out of his eyes, but he can't control it. But if you just put on like ruby glasses, he's good. He's good. Yeah, like, for sure. Doesn't it leak out the sides? I mean, I don't understand how this works. But, the other one I liked was Nightcrawler.
Nightcrawler's good. I love Gambit.
Yeah,
I thought Gambit.
Yes,
and they don't show him enough in the movies. You know?
I just actually got my son. We were in New York City, and there's a great comic book store there called Forbidden Planet. So I took him there, and he got the Gambit graphic novel. He was
sick.
He loved it.
Yeah,
he read it like before we even left New York. He was like so quickly going through it.
Right. You're like, shit, we're gonna have to go back to that store.
It's like
I'm done.
I'm done. Like, he did the same thing with something on the plane. I'm like, slow down. He reads quickly like his mom does. So
I could never understand that. It takes me like, you know, and I'll go through 2 pages and be like, I got to go back.
Yeah.
I got to go back now. What just happened, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like the difference between reading just like to immerse yourself or this, like, if you have this like desire to finish, like get through it. Like my wife's like that. She just cranks through books. like very, very quickly. But I am not. I'm much slower in the process. So. But yeah,
well, I guess you're a writer, so you're probably like really thinking about every word as you read it, versus like, yeah, I just think people like that are just more in the theme, and maybe it correlates too to like how you eat, like do you want complex tasting menus and like really above board food, or do you want just like regular fare, cook the steak, put the tomatoes on it, all good,
right? Well, that's in wine too, right? Just sort of like, do you want to be thinking about the wine, or do you want to be just immersed in the pleasure of the?
Do you want to add ice or not? that's my.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way of knowing who you're dealing with, right there. So.
What do you think of Coke and red wine? That's like a Spanish thing.
Is it?
And I've drank it a few times. I gotta say, it's fucking good.
Is that like an alternative?
It's like
sangria?
a thing. It's like a thing they do. Yeah, Coca-Cola red wine. It's really good. Have you ever had it?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, we gotta hook it up. We gotta hook it up, bro. We gotta get some. Maybe that's the next book. Wine variations.
Sangria is as far as I've gone. So that was, yeah. And I was down in Miami for a long time, but I didn't. I never came across that down there. So I don't know.
Got it. And so the book, Finding Meaning in Wine, I'll be honest with you, I have not read this. Okay? I got it a week ago. I've been working 16 hours a day, but I have done some research, and basically you're talking about a lot of the, not just the regular like, oh, it tastes good and we grew it this way, but actually like sort of the politics behind the science of making the wine. And one of the things that stood out to me was the biodynamic stuff. And that, I've seen farms that are biodynamically farmed,
right,
and they just look better. And I don't know, it's like a lot of hoopla and a lot of like, smoke and mirrors.
Right.
But it also brings me back to the fact that I have seen some cooks who are not technically sound that can make better food because they're not worried about the final product. They're just producing with their heart, So all that to say, like, what do you think about biodynamic wine? What made you go that route, and what made you not stick to the traditional, like, this is this person, he makes this wine this way,
right?
Yeah,
I mean, so that I'll talk about biodynamics first, I guess. It was very interesting to me. Like, I just started researching it in part because like people were talking to me about it when I first started, and they didn't know a ton about it in terms of the specifics and where it came from and who developed it. And, it was developed by this figure from the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, Rudolf Steiner, who apparently didn't drink.
Apparently. Who's a record of this? Like, he never had a bar tab. Like, what the?
Well, I encourage you at some point to look up this guy. Okay. He's a fascinating figure. He's sort of like a classic figure of this time, where he's kind of a polymath. He's into a lot of different subjects. Like, so the story goes like that he met someone who was, I think, doing some homeopathic medicine, and he was concerned about farming. So he gave these lectures on farming that developed into biodynamic farming. I don't think he really was a farmer either, except that he was sort of speaking to these things. And then he worked with someone who helped develop the sprays that the biodynamic farmers use and things like that. I mean, what I was really interested in was there's this kind of tension in the wine world between this sort of notion of folks that farm via science and scientific method and the sort of lessons they've learned, a lot of them through the UC Davis program, and those that focus on things like, well, organic, I put in a sort of almost third category, but the biodynamics is not, it's not based in the scientific method.
Yeah.
And so it's, like when I asked Morgan Twain Peterson about it, like the first thing he said is biodynamics is a religion. I don't want anything to do with it.
Got it.
And so like there is a kind of mysticism around it as well. And it's, the argument that most people, whether they like biodynamics or not, would tell you about like why those vineyards look good is that biodynamic farming requires attention to the vineyards in a kind of very specific way.
Right.
And so if you're doing that, probably the vineyard is going to do well. Now, if you believe in biodynamics, you would also start saying that, you know, the processes that you're using, the sprays that you're using, you know, planting by the cycle, you know, farming by the moon cycle and all these sort of things are what works. But the people that are skeptical would say it's just that because you're not using some of the kind of chemical products that you have to be paying attention to the vineyard all the time. You know, I say, you know, and I've said this to people who ask me, like, I don't feel like I'm exactly in a position to judge. I mean, I was talking to Ted Lemon, who's a firm sort of biodynamic guy, and he does his own vineyard this way. You can go there. The cows are coming through the vineyard. Yeah. It's a beautiful place. He works with a lot of vineyards. He tries to get the vineyards he works with to go biodynamic. In fact, I visited one this week. Yeah. And, you know, I said to him, like, well, you know, how do you know it's working? You know, and it's, well, I saw it, you know, and so there's this way in which it's like judged by intuition, observation, those kinds of things rather than like scientific testing. Yeah. And I even said to him at one point, if, you know, because, you know, I think Ted wants, I mean, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he wants other people to follow the model. I mean, he's clearly trying to get other vineyard owners to follow this model. Yeah. So I said, well, how about testing? You know, so you could say, look, it works. And he's like, I don't want to be a part of the scientific process. Like he doesn't want to do that. He's skeptical of the way science-based farming has worked, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. So I found it fascinating. I thought I saw it as this kind of part of a kind of ongoing debate that's out there in like culture, which is between like reason and feeling, and like science lining up with reason and biodynamics with feeling. It's, you know, it's your gut, you know, this is working kind of thing. It's emotion based in a lot of ways. Yeah, exactly. And so I was fascinated by just like the nature of the debate in some ways, but like I'm you know, I perfectly admit,
outside spectator.
Yeah, exactly. Got it. And so I was really interested in how it resembled these kind of ongoing debates through time between sort of reason-based points of view and emotion-based points of view. And so I suddenly realized like that's what's kind of going on here. And I was really fascinated by it. So I like tried to make sure I talked to people that, you know, do different kinds of things to get their sense of it. I also talked to Hank Beckmeyer, who's more influenced by the sort of known, you know, the farming where you're not supposed to like do any farming. It's you know, developed out of Japan.
Just like whatever happens kind of deal.
Yes. And like he had done biodynamics, and I
kind of like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean,
no editing.
No editing. Just let it go.
Drop it in, baby.
Right. No cooking. Yeah. I mean, it's all very fascinating. I mean that like it's not biodynamics, but it resembles it to some extent to me, as far as I understood it. And the book, I want to say his name is Fuoco. I might mispronounce it, but the book is like, it's like this conversion tale. Like I was a scientist. Yeah. And then I realized that science was wrong. The people that best understand nature are babies. Yeah. And
I'd say I don't disagree with him, because you can drop a baby in some water and they can live. They can figure out how to hold their breath underwater for at least a little bit. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, how does that work? And I sort of, when I was little, there was things that I knew how to do as a baby. Like for some reason, I could ride a bike when I was like 3 years old, no training wheels, done. I didn't do it for a couple years, and we moved to the States, whatever. And then when I was like, you know, 8 or 9, learning again, I was like, how come I don't know how to do this? But I knew how to do this before with nobody really teaching me. They were just like, go. And I think, you know, just like they say, ignorance is bliss. Sometimes I think the people that don't know any better are the more successful. Because like you said, you just keep revising and revising and revising. And it's like that work is never going to be perfect. But the striving for perfection is where sort of like the perfection lies.
Right.
You know? And so I'm just, out of all you said, I feel like it's the same theme over and over again with people. They either want the left or the right. And I'm like, bro, you should be scientifically emotional. You know what I'm saying? Like, understand that, okay, I'm sad right now. Well, what did I do earlier? Yeah, I ate a lot of sugar. I was watching TV. I used my phone a lot, you know?
Right.
And now, okay, that it kind of explains, I used all my endorphins this morning.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't have any other chemicals to fire off to be happy at 3 p.m. anymore because all I did, you know, whatever.
Right.
And so I feel like that's what needs to happen. And these people are like, no, it's all emotion, or no, it's all science. And it's like, can't negate either.
Well, and that's why it feels like it's political, right?
Right.
Because there's no middle ground to have, you know, one point.
Discourse.
Yeah. I mean, this is the tricky thing, right? Where if what counts for evidence for one person doesn't count for evidence for the other person, how can you find a middle ground?
Right.
Right? Because like scientific method testing doesn't work for the emotion folks, the biodynamics and anyone who sort of leans in some version of that.
Yeah.
The science folks want to see it proven by scientific method. So you can tell me that you've observed it, but it's not good enough for me because that's just you. And so like, I think it is polarizing in that world. And it is very hard for folks to find that place. And one of the things I found over and over again when I was looking at different controversies in the world of wine is that there isn't a lot of middle ground on some of those issues. And they tends to be polarizing. It tends to be dogmatic, and you know, it alienates people. And it sort of goes through these sort of cycles where there's that kind of big eruption of this moment and kind of fades back down a little bit. And it's interesting to consider whether or not some of those moments have impacted, they change the direction that things are going. But yeah, it was one of the things I was really interested in, you know, so you asked me at the very start of this, like, why didn't I just like want to write about, like, tell me about your wine?
Yeah.
and you know, and I mean, I guess I'm not that, I love wine, so don't get me wrong, but it wasn't what I found myself sort of interested in doing when I was meeting with these people. And, you know, I thought one of the things, the one advantage I thought in my interview process was I was outside the world in some ways. Like, I wasn't there to like help sell magazines and help them sell wine or things along those lines. And I gave them time, you know? And so, you know, the longer I gave them time, the more they could sort of see where I was coming from, the more candid I felt like they would get. Yeah. And I asked them different, you know, I asked them different kind of questions, I think, than they typically got from the wine press. Yeah. And I got different kind of answers, I think, because of that. And I just saw the other day, Hardy Wallace, who's in the book, and he said, you know, I think people were really candid with you. And I think I was, you know, it's the luck of that position that I was in. But I was really interested in, like, how do they think about these things? And, you know, they're in it all the time. And some of them, like, are clearly thinking about this stuff extensively. Like, even when I was talking to Ted, I felt like maybe I was willing to listen longer about his views than most wine journalists were. Like, they wanted a snippet. Yeah, exactly. And so, like, I was willing to listen. I was willing to get into the conversation with them too. Yeah. And I was trying to learn, you know. I mean, there's things that are in the book that I am an expert in, but a lot of the wine stuff was about me learning from them. And they were willing to help me in that process. But yeah, that's, you know, there are a lot of books about how to drink a glass of wine and how to appreciate wine and things like that. I was just interested in thinking about wine. Right. And
I like that different approach. You know what I mean? That's why I do the podcast, because I'm like, I wanted to ask you about this too, because I'm in the field interviewing people usually in my field, right? So they will be candid with me because they know I've gone through it. Right. And so how do you get that trust? And like you said, time.
Right.
You just spend time with them, you get comfortable with them, and you ask them different questions. Because I've tried to get some star chefs on the show, and they're like, just don't ask me like what my fucking favorite dish is. You know what I mean? Because I don't want to answer that shit, right? But then there's people that are like tied by the media campaigns that they run that they can't be honest. Right. You know, and I think that type of freedom isn't worth any kind of money. Right. You know, when you're at the top.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I mean, I tried to interview a decent range of winemakers, but I would say a lot of them were smaller scale producers. And so maybe they didn't feel that kind of protecting their image in quite the same way. Though, I mean, I honestly feel like I don't feel like that there's any negative betrayals of the folks in there, because I wasn't judging what they said so much as trying to understand what they were saying in a kind of a larger relationship about ideas. And I mean, I think, it's hard. I mean, in some ways it'd be better to ask them about why they trusted me. But I do think like, they're just, I mean, a lot of the winemakers are just like genuine, like people. And like, if you're there and you're just like interested in what they're doing, and you have that kind of, passion for what they're doing and want to hear, they want to tell you. And like, you know, that's you know, that's what it comes, just like I'm sure with like, even like with chefs, like, you know, don't tell me about the meal, but tell me what it's like, what's your day like, you know, how did the changes in prices affect your life, or things like that. And, you know, the things that people don't ask them every day, like then they're starting to like feel like you're interested in them as a human first. Right. It's like, you know, I mean, that's one of the things I came away from in the book, was like just a real appreciation of how difficult the life of the winemakers were. And that's very different than the, you know, romantic idea of like wine production that, you know, if you're just following Instagram and reading Wine Spectator, that you're likely to have.
Well, usually the sommelier gets most of the credit because they're at the table telling you about it. You know what I mean? And they got the nice suit on, and they know everything about it. And they've talked to the same guys you've talked to, you know? And so that's also kind of like a weird thing to me, where it's like, they have to sell their wine at 300% less than the restaurant makes from it. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, where's the break on that? How about let's go 150%, right? And I get it. Like, I don't want to make wine expensive for everybody, but like, these winemakers are starving. Like, you know, a lot of them are really having a hard time. And the policies and all the rules you got to follow don't make it, you know, easier. No. And so there's a buzzword that goes around a lot in the wine industry, and that's natural wine, right? And you ask a lot of these people, and they're like, well, all wine is natural. Like, come on. It's like kind of like the same as organic, right? A lot of the farms in California are organic. They just don't have the money to pay for that certification, you know? So a lot of your conventional stuff here is organic. And I feel like natural is the opposite, and everything is just kind of natural, but some of it does taste like fucking kombucha. You know what I mean? So it's like, where does it break? Did you interview any people that are like, I make natural wine?
Yes. Okay. I wrote, you know, I did write about natural wine, because I was actually, or just the way you described it, I wrote about it in the chapter that I wrote about tasting notes. But I was interested in sort of the language and the way the language itself. Actually, no, excuse me. I wrote about that later in the farming chapter. But I was interested in the way the language is so polarizing, right? So, like, as you say, what's the opposite of natural wine, right? You know, and this is sort of, and you know, the other problem that even the folks that are proponents of natural wine struggle with is how do you define it? Like, what makes a wine a natural wine as opposed to whatever the other kinds of wines are? And there seems to be a kind of constant struggle about that. I mean, what I would say is that I didn't really like interview anyone who just like completely embraced the label, because I feel like they all felt self-conscious about it, but a lot of them would be associated with the natural wine movement. Right. So, you know, it's So I have a slightly different take on it, that in a way, which is that I was fascinated by, first of all, this problem of definition, right? Like, is it no sulfur?
Right.
What are we talking about? And, there's some stuff that came up in my research that I thought was interesting too, which is like, its origins, like a lot of things with wine, are in France. Yeah. And in France, like, you have a lot more of the model of the vigneron, the person grows the grapes and then makes the wine. Mm-hmm. And a lot of winemakers that are associated with natural wine here are likely to be ones that they're buying the grapes and then they're making the wine. So there's a kind of, so for here, it's very much tied up in the process of making the wine as opposed to the farming. So like one of the people, Martha Stoneman, said, I want to connect it to the farming. Like, to me, it's about all of that.
Yeah, it's
process.
About the land and the people doing it, you know?
Right. But the thing that struck me that was sort of fascinating, like to your comment about some of it tastes like kombucha, to me, some of it tastes like cider.
Straight up, yeah.
And, is that there's this argument about it, which is like, it's questioning the criteria for evaluation.
Right.
Like, it's basically saying, like, the things that you associate, the qualities you associate in wine that you think are good, we're saying, no, these qualities are good. The things that we do with natural wine, which is what pisses off all the people that don't make natural wine. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. We're saying things like, this stuff is crap. Like, how are you telling me that this is great? Right. You're telling me that I should think crap is good, know, and that fascinated me a lot. Mm-hmm. And I tell a story in the book that Tegan Pasalakwa said that he was told by some natural wine folks that his wine was too clean.
It's always, like I said, left or right. It's never in the middle.
Right.
Right. There's also not wine categories like fine dining, casual dining, fast food. It's just wine. And then everybody just has to like fit in and try to like, promote their stuff in a way that makes it in the class that they want to make it in.
Right. It's where that is in the people who sell the wine.
Right.
That's where they have their
sommeliers, maybe.
Yeah, or even the distributor merchants, folks, and they have they'll have those categories,
right?
But most consumers aren't using those, right? Like, so I mean, the best I think of is like supermarket wine versus wine that I'm getting from a wine store, but I mean, I think that some people have asked me, like, do I think natural wine was successful? It has been successful, and it's like, I mean, if you go around New York and there's natural wine bars everywhere, you have to say
it definitely is. It definitely is. But it's getting it's too much. There's like 4 natural wine shops on the same block, and it's all the same. Hey, cheese and crackers and tinned fish, and that's all. It's all good. I'm not saying that you can't do that kind of thing, but I'm like, where's the character?
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Where's the different things? And something about businesses, they'll let you open whatever you want. Like in California when there was those 2 Starbucks across the street from each other. And it's like, I feel like there should be a little bit more regulation about who opens a business and why, because the banks win no matter whether you win or lose, the banks always win. So it's like, why are we setting people up for failure?
Right.
Well,
and it's one of those things that's clearly it'll burn itself out to some extent. Yeah. I mean, it's just no way it won't. But it is. I mean, I do think it's had a certain amount of success in the process. Like, the thing I don't love it when it tastes cidery, and I can't handle Brett very well. Yeah. Which I find is more likely there maybe, but. I've also had good sound bottles of natural wine, and so it's out there. But certainly there's some. I've also opened wines that looks like it's a chemical experiment.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've gone to these tastings. You go to these. Sonoma has one up there in the woods and shit, and it's like there's Terra Wine Company, right? Mm-hmm. Well put together, like just doing their thing, and then you go a couple more booths down, and it's like a homeless dude, like you know what I'm saying? Like, hey man, we just made, and I'm like, what is the? I'm not trying to be classist or like you got to separate this, but like, it just doesn't make any sense, and like, it's why it's hard to have a casual restaurant in the same house where you do fine dining. At some point, it's either going to break to the right or break to the left of what you're doing. That's what happens with these restaurants that I'm going to do a la carte and have a tasting menu.
Right.
Over time, one of those menus is going to get picked more than the other, and then you're just going to say, well, let's just go all casual, or let's just do all tastings.
Right. To have an identity.
Exactly. And that's why, again, I guess you can't be middle of the road, right? You have to have some kind of strong view.
Yeah, I mean, the natural wine thing, it's so funny because it's so, you brought up sommeliers a couple of times, and that I think is particularly associated also with some younger sommeliers.
Yeah. Well, they want to loosen the tie.
Yeah, right.
After all the patriarchal shit that happened over there at the W set and all that.
Yeah.
I think we definitely have to make changes, but there is some overcorrections going on in the atmosphere out here. You know what I'm saying? And what's your take on that kind of stuff? All the things that came out about the testing and people paying to pass or like playing favorites. Did you deal with any of that or talk to anybody?
No, I mean, the main sommelier figure that I spoke to was Raj Parr, who had written the book, The Secrets of the Sommelier, and, in a long time had been, part of the MENA group and things like that. But I didn't, I didn't focus too much on that, though. It was funny when I was interviewing Raj the first time, two young women who were taking the test came up to actually get help from Raj to prepare for the test and those sort of things. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of funny. I haven't studied the history of sort of restaurants and sommeliers, but it does seem like there's been a proliferation of sommeliers.
For sure. They become superstars. Some TV. I mean, they got their own network now.
Right.
But again, they know the marketing of it.
Yes.
Right. Why don't farmers have that sort of press attention? It's getting there, right?
Yeah.
More and more farmers these days are becoming influencers, and people are like, oh, wow, yeah, who's going to farm our crops if we're all over here making YouTube videos?
Right. I mean, I think, to be honest, I think a lot of them don't want it. They don't, that's why they're farmers in a way. It's like, but the sommeliers have become kind of this, voice for that kind of approach, for sure, that's sort of separated from them. I mean, it's funny to see, I know that Raj isn't the only sommelier who then became a winemaker, and Raj is really into farming. He started a Phelan farm and things like that now. So he's moved more and more in that direction, actually being a sommelier, but he's not really in that same window of the kind of somms that you're talking about. But I do, it feels like part of the things like the scandals is sort of part of the proliferation of it. It's just the way people become sommeliers and the need to have those diplomas and things like that now, which I just don't feel like was maybe part of the scene 20 years ago.
I think some of the wines that are thought to be the best in the world, maybe 20 years ago, I think a lot of the scandals that have happened recently, the guy who was selling all that fake wine with the blank labels in the bathtub and all that shit.
Right.
It just shows you okay, so he just sold it to you and you're like, oh, this is awesome. And then now Costco is doing the same thing where they're buying the wine from some of the greatest winemakers in the world and then packaging it in a way for normal people. And it's it brings me back to drinking beer and having the realization of oh, Bud Light is Budweiser. And eventually it's Busch Light. And just where does it end?
Right. Well, I mean, with the top wines, how much exposure does anyone usually have to those to be able to detect the differences of them? So, there's a susceptibility. You want it to be real.
Yeah.
When you want it to be real, it becomes real in that sort of way. But yeah, I mean, those are remarkable stories about those scandals for sure.
Well, you're paying for the name after a while, and that a lot sometimes means that it's not like they're going to drop the ball, but they've already been grandfathered in. I look at this valley and I'm like, the French Laundry. Do you think they're ever going to lose their third star? Hell no. They are nowhere near in danger of losing their third star, and they almost never will be.
Yeah.
If they keep up the way they've been doing it.
Right.
You just get better and better, right?
Right.
So but I wonder, like, on their off nights, does a Michelin inspector go in there and say, "Oh wow, maybe we should think about docking them or something like that"? You know, I'm sure there's been those conversations before.
Right.
It's not going to happen because why? Because Michelin makes a lot of money from the French Laundry being a 3-star restaurant.
Yeah.
You know, they're a business.
Right.
Right. But they put the asses in the seats, and it's always this debate with chefs of like whether Michelin is important or not. And it's like, I know they're a tire company, but they kind of are. You don't need one, but when you get one, your restaurant's life becomes a little bit easier.
Oh, I mean, my family loves cooking competition shows. And
what are they watching right now?
I mean, honestly, like they'll watch almost anything that Gordon Ramsay's on. And
Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, Hell's Kitchen. I mean, once my son got old enough to, where the bleeping was okay. But so it always cracks me up that he always introduces anyone by their Michelin stars. It's like your entire value as a person is determined by he has this many Michelin stars.
For real, bro.
And so, I mean, and
you know what I had a chef tell me the other day? Like, not the other day, it was a couple months ago. I was like, looking for work or whatever. He goes, we're looking for a chef that's won his own Michelin stars, not a chef that's worked in a Michelin star kitchen. And I told myself, I was like, okay, I got to get Michelin stars because I don't want to get to 65 years old and get treated like Charles Barkley does. You know what I'm saying? For not winning championships. Like, I'm not doing that.
He cooked for 30 years, but he never had a Michelin star. What kind of career was that?
Exactly, bro. And I'm like, it doesn't mean the world, but bro, it's a good goal to have within your industry, just like getting your doctorate in academia.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So,
well, and I remember the big thing the big thing in the US before they started doing this was the Zagat books, and especially in New York where I would visit in New York, and that it was the same thing. Well, they have a 27, 27's great, but this place has a 28,
Right.
So what's told me, like, don't go to a sushi restaurant that doesn't have at least a 26. It was like part of the way in which it was. But the other thing I was going to say to about the Michelin and those scandals is like, that's also the tied up in the wine criticism, the sort of question of whether or not, the wineries are in bed with
the fuck is that? Oh, wow. That's crazy. I thought I had that shit on silence. This whole time. Jesus. Okay, good. Good to go. All right, sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
Let's do it. How are we doing on time? It is about to be 11.
Yeah, I'm good.
Cool,
I mean,
cool.
I think when our wine delivery is supposed to happen.
11.
11.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll probably end it there.
Okay.
So your family has some time to see their dad.
They've seen me plenty, but thank you.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, are you working from home?
I mean, not all the time. Well, over the summer, I don't teach in the summer.
Okay, got it.
And actually, one of the things I do is I coach soccer, and my son plays. So we spend a lot of car time driving around and stuff. So,
do you think it's hard for him to be the coach's son?
So this is one of the things that I used to be his coach, but we moved to a different club so he would have other coaches. So I haven't coached him for a couple of years.
Did you do that on purpose?
Yeah.
Just so he would got it.
Because I mean, we never had a problem, but I didn't want to get to the point where we did. And the other thing is I just think it's too much to have the same coach over and over again. And it's also it never ends, because you don't want to be living with your coach,
for sure.
at some point and stuff. He seemed to like having me as a coach, which, I want him to have that memory in a way. I don't want to get to that point, but I just think it was important for him to learn to deal with other personalities and other people and have different kind of experiences. Sometimes they're not great. Sometimes they are. But yeah, that was important in the decision to go to a different place because we live in a very small town. So there weren't a lot of options there. So we actually basically commute to the club that we're at.
Yeah.
But I coach 2 teams at that club. club.
How long you been coaching soccer? Is this like a high school thing? You used to play soccer in high school?
I played soccer and ice hockey growing up.
Okay.
And then I said, I'm never going to coach. I'm never going to coach.
Yeah.
Very briefly, I played goalkeeper in soccer. So very briefly, I helped some friends' sons' team help the goalkeepers. I did that like for one season, and I was like, I'm not going to do it. Then my son started playing, and it was like, who else is going to coach him? And I have another friend who just laughs at me about this because he would tell me over and over again, you're going to become a coach. You're going to become a coach. And then, so when he was like, I want to say like when he was like 5, so maybe like 8, 9 years I've been coaching now. I started coaching, and I actually I have like U.S. soccer coaching licenses and things like that. So I've gone to these coaching courses and stuff, and it's pretty cool experience of doing them. Some of the last one I did was like really hard, but it's been fun. I've learned. I just like learning. Like it's the same thing with the book as it was about coaching soccer. It's just like I enjoy that, and I like working with the kids, and it's fun. It's fun. You get. I usually have I'll have the same kids usually like 2 years. And so just sort of watching them grow and hopefully get better as players, but also like how they grow emotionally and stuff like that. I really like it, and try to make it's one of the ways I try to just help community in that sort of way. So so it's one of the things I've been doing a lot of in the last couple of years for sure. So we have a pretty the club that we're part of is a pretty good club in Indianapolis. So
got it. So that's where you're at, Indianapolis.
Yeah, I'm out. We live in a small town about an hour outside of Indianapolis, but yeah, that's where we go and play soccer and stuff like that.
Got you. And so I read a couple notes on where you kind of got into wine. Was that Florida?
Yeah.
What were you doing over there?
Yeah, so the basic story is that I went to graduate school there.
Okay, got it.
So my then girlfriend, my now wife, Robin, she was going to go to the 6-year med program down there. So I tried to follow her, and then
you achieved success.
Yes, yeah. I didn't really know what I was doing.
Right.
I honestly when I applied for graduate school, I had so little idea of what I was doing. It's kind of scary. I always joke with students who would talk to me about it, you already know more than I did. When I first got a letter saying that I would be teaching as part of graduate school, I was like, what? That's why I was down there, and I used to hang out at a wine store in Coral Gables, which is kind of a wealthy area of where the University of Miami is. And I used to hang out there. There was a guy that worked in a store that was around my age, and we would learn stuff together. I would hang out there, hope someone who was wealthy would come in, ask to taste the wine, that they would open the bottle, because they would do things I might buy a case. If you open the bottle, we could taste it. I got to taste it, and I would do all the time. I would do things I didn't have very much money. I was a graduate student, but it was of course. I'd be like, I have this amount of money. I would go to the people that work there, and I would say, what would you buy? Anything in this store with this money? What's the best thing to try? And that's what I would do. And I occasionally had might get up to $30 or something like that, or whatever at the time. And then they, I remember one of the wines that really stood out to me was so they would occasionally buy back cellars if someone died, for instance, or things like that. So they had some Rieslings that they had sold to the person because they still had the tags on them, and they were 20 years old, and they were selling them for $8 or something like that. So I went to the wine buyer for the store, and I said, should I buy these? To me at the time, it meant something. He's like, buy 2. If one is good, you'll never regret it.
Yeah.
And it was it was the first wine that I remember that was amazing. It was one of those bottles, and that kind of got me kind of hooked on it. And I don't know, I just had this idea in my head, it would be nice to have dinners where you sat down and you had a bottle of wine and like you enjoyed it. And I had these ideas about that, and that kind of drove me. And then I just, like I said, I love learning. So it's like wine's one of those things, like I can feel like I can never know everything about wine. Like I could just keep learning more and more. Even like coming out here this week, I just felt like I kept learning you know, during the process, depending on who I got to talk to. So that I loved about it. And then in a weird way, the book is in part about like the way when I moved to a small town in Indiana, and I had much more limited availability of like meeting people to help me learn about wine, that I found myself like reading magazines all the time. And then realizing like that was dominating like how I understood, you know, and that was very much like from the industry, like, you know, central. And so I felt like when I started doing research on this book, like I was like, wow, there is so much going on out here that I had no idea about, and just radically changed my whole sort of view about what life was like for winemakers, what winemakers were doing, that like, you know, not everyone was making cabs that were 15% alcohol. And, you know, and so it was incredible to have that, you know, just experience, but it really made me reframe all of like that process, like what it's like when your main way of learning something is through a sort of straight magazine like that. So yeah, I mean, but it was like really like the initial thing was just hanging out with a guy who was cool to hang out with, and we both were interested in wine, and there were older folks in there that worked there that really knew a lot about wine, and just listening and learning, and like just realizing there's just all kinds of stuff to explore and kind of get into it that way. Got you.
That's awesome. Was your wife, now then girlfriend, worried about you drinking so much? I mean, it's spending your last $30 on a bottle of wine.
We hope that since she was in medical school, we hope that eventually we would have a sustainable income. So we were okay. I mean, she always jokes that she benefits from my interest. Like, you know, so that's, as long as she keeps feeling that way, we're okay. As far as that goes. But yeah, I mean, like if there's worse places to be hanging out, you know.
For sure, man. I hear you. I'm like, what the fuck? That's so funny.
So it's grading essays, you know, teaching classes, taking classes, and, you know, and hanging out in a wine store. You know, it's a good way to go.
When you were first like becoming a teacher, what were your thoughts on like you know, when kids behave badly in class or aren't listening? Like, I'm sure you've had to deal with a lot of that. Like, do you go to other older professors and ask them what they've done, or is there books on this shit?
You know, the funniest thing is that like when I first started teaching, I was 21. Like I just graduated from college. I went straight to graduate school. You probably wouldn't know now, but I looked pretty young. I had hair, and I used to like, I was so self-conscious that I was so young, and that they would just like push me around, that I would like wear ties, and like no one who teaches, like none of the senior faculty that teach in Miami wear ties because it's so freaking hot down there. You know, like you have to park. Like by the time I would like park and get to the classroom, I'd be like dripping in sweat and stuff, you know. But you know, it's one of the things. So I had like, it bothered me when I first started teaching that, you know, everyone had to be like paying attention, you know, hanging on my every word. And I had a kind of epiphany once where I was teaching a class, and it looked like this kid had like pulled out a newspaper in the class and was like reading the newspaper instead of paying attention to me. And I kind of called him out. And I said, you know, I want to talk to you at the end of the class. And he comes up to me after the class and he is crying. And it turns out like something bad had happened in his life. It had affected him. He completely lost focus in the classroom, and he was just falling apart. And like, it was a great insight to me that changed everything about how I taught, which is this moment of realizing like when you're in the front of the classroom, it always feels like it's about you. You know, the world is focused on you. And then, but it's not. Like, it's the things that you perceive as like affecting you, a lot of that is like, it's about what's going on with the students. It's, and you have to, as a teacher, you have to like let some of your ego go and find out what they're doing and what's going on in their lives. And it changed everything about that. Like it made me try not to be, my thing was always, it's funny because it's similar to how I feel about coaching. It's like, I don't want to yell at a player on the field. I want to take him off the field and ask him what's going on.
Yeah.
When I see something that I didn't like with a student, I wanted to talk to them after the class rather than, I could deliver a caustic line if I want in a class, but like, I don't do that. I stopped doing that kind of thing. It's just find out first, like what's going on, let them understand what I see. Yeah. And then see if that can resolve and change the issue, or maybe they need help, and that was, but it was hard. Yeah. It's
difficult, bro. Yeah, for sure. Especially when you're young, you're a hothead. You're like, you want to fight back, but they're kids and they don't know any better. Yeah. And I think our wine is here.
Okay.
No problem. The key is right here.
Well, I got my backup.
Oh, got it. Okay. I just, I got robbed in Rhode Island once, and ever since then I've been paranoid. So I took the key thinking someone's going to come up here and grab this key, make a copy, Yeah. Liv, this is Michael Sinowitz.
Hi.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice
he wrote this baby right here. So yeah, just doing a podcast based off that. I did a podcast with Lindsay in the other room.
Okay.
Probably a month ago or something.
Yeah. Gotcha.
For sure.
I got some rosé for you?
Sure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Liv.
Thank you.
What's your book about? Just a little tiny blurb.
Here. You can take it with you. I think he has one.
Yeah.
That we can flash at the camera later on.
Okay. I will give this back in just a little bit.
Thanks a lot, Liv. I appreciate it.
If you want, I have a couple in my car.
Oh
so
yeah,
just
you should.
let me know.
We should drop some off here. You should put some reading material.
Right now, so I have like an arsenal of wine books.
Okay.
Sick. All right. Thank you, Liv. Okay. So, hell yeah, drinking some rosé. Hoops rosé, delicious. We're in there. This is called the library, which they just have a lot of classic bottles in here. That hence the temperature. That's why I didn't want to keep the door open. Yeah. Because, you did a podcast and spoiled all my collectible wine, you son of a. And I'd be like, oh, sorry about that.
This will be your last visit to our
exactly,
library.
And that'll be it. It'll be the last thing. What is your hope with this book? Like the readers that partake in it, like what are you looking for them to get out of it?
Right. I think I want people to get a sense of what winemakers think about some of these issues and debates, for sure.
Right.
I tried to give their voices a pretty good place in the book.
Yeah.
I hope that people that like to think about, in some ways, think about things related to art, but think about things of wine, will enjoy the book. And it's written in a way that I try to make any of the kind of more intellectual parts of it accessible to people.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've been struck that some of the set pieces that are in the book that are more sort of nonfiction, people seem to really, really like them. And there are those pieces throughout. And, the winemakers are fascinating. So just just hearing what they have to say is really cool. So it's a great experience to do that. And, it's a different way of thinking about some of these kinds of issues that have been circulating around wine, like blind tasting and tasting notes. And I had a lot of fun writing the chapter called about whether or not winemakers are artists. And a couple of the farming related chapters with biodynamics and stuff, but also the last chapter is about greatness and how to define greatness. And that was a lot of fun to write about too. And asking winemakers what they thought made great wines. And so these are all things I think most people that are pretty serious about wine have some connection to. And I think these are just sort of slightly different ways of thinking about those issues from the way, the wine press typically talks about them. And so if you like thinking about things, it's a good book for you.
Hell yeah. And now you've written other books.
Yeah.
And are those related to wine as well, or? No,
the first book I wrote was about the series written by a guy named Patrick O'Brien. One of his books was made into the movie Master and Commander: Far Side of the World with Russell Crowe. Yeah. So that's like a 20-volume series.
That shit's crazy.
Yeah. So that's what there is a section about, because the two main characters, I guess wine is in everything I write about. Yeah. The two main characters in the series, Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin, they love wine, and O'Brien did clearly too. So there's various times throughout the books where they're constantly worrying about the wine that they have aboard ship and things like that. So
right.
So I actually wrote about this, like a chapter that's about like drugs. There's a lot of drug use actually in the series. Surprisingly, like the doctor's an opium addict. Yeah. So I wrote a chapter about like addictive substances in the series and stuff like that. So there's some wine stuff in there for sure. And the sailors are all drinking rum and stuff. But
were they all just hammered all the time? Is that how it worked?
Well, I mean, I don't know. The books are certainly built out of the historical record, so I'm going to give them a fair amount of credit for this. But this is one of the things that repeatedly comes up in the books is the idea that you better not run out of grog. You better not run out of rum, because that's part of the sailors' regiment, that they will be given a fair amount of it. But the dinners for the officers like almost always end with port. And I don't know what your experience with port is, but if you keep passing around a port around the table,
done, man. You're going to sleep for sure.
Yeah, and every once in a while there's like a
that's why I was like, what is a pirate? I think they wake up late. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure there's crews that work the night shift or whatever, but like, if you're all drunk all the time, at some point all of you are gonna pass out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I assume they developed some kind of not maybe for port, but for the grog, maybe. But
do you think that's where a designated driver comes from?
Yeah. You don't want to be. You probably don't want to be slamming a sailing ship into the rocks or something, because
that's what I'm saying. Because you were hammered, bro.
Yeah,
your whole crew getting up mad at you.
Well, the funny thing is, like, at that time, the midshipmen, which are kind of like junior officers, they could be like teenage boys.
Yeah.
And so in the books, they will write about like there'll be one of them at one of these dinner, like an official dinner with the captain, and like he'll slump down below the table as the dinner goes on because he's completely hammered from the constant drinking. And my friend, I have a good friend who also loves wine and loves O'Brien, and we love this phrase from that, which is like when they're at dinner, they always say to each other, "The bottle stands by you, sir."
Right.
Which is the idea, like you're supposed to pour yourself some wine and pass it to the next person. So, you get the sense that like it's not a good dinner unless everyone's glass is constantly being full. Right. Like that. So
I like that, man. I mean, say what you want to say about alcohol, but that should inspire good conversation. Like it makes the unpassionate passionate.
Yes.
Right? Because there's a certain level of people that are just walking around here kind of like on autopilot.
Yes.
Like I learned recently that not everyone has an inner dialogue. And I'm like, well, Like, who do you talk to? Like, how do you think? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I just don't have that perspective. So,
Mhm.
you know, I'd love to have someday, someone on here who's like, yeah, I just don't, you know.
I'm just outer.
Yeah,
I have
I'm
no
just
inner
out of-
life.
Yeah, exactly. No inner life, no nothing.
Yeah.
You know. And sometimes I envy that simpleness, you know, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm like always striving to be better and better and better.
Mhm.
And sometimes I can drive you to madness, you
Right.
know. Like we were talking in the beginning about, you know, kind of when does it end? When is the dish over?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So
Do you find that when you feel that way about cooking, like you're sitting over a dish and you're trying to make it right?
So the thing with a kitchen and even a podcast is that the conversation is ongoing. Like you said, you publish this book. That's the work.
Right.
That's it. You know, it's not going to change unless you make another volume or whatever it is, right? And that level of finality, I'll call it, it's like I can't deal with that. You know,
Right.
I'm like life keeps moving, right? That's why I look at people who make movies and I'm like, God damn, you got a lot of balls. You know, you made something, you got an hour and a half to tell a story or 2 hours, and the amount of work that goes into it and all that. And then for it to come out and be a piece of shit, and you're like, you certainly didn't get up in the morning and intend for the movie to be a piece of shit. Just
Right.
like if someone has a bad dinner at a restaurant, like the chef didn't wake up that morning and says, you know what I'm going to do? You know what I'm saying? So it's like,
There's someone coming in here, I'm going to screw with
yeah,
his life.
exactly. I'm going to ruin their birthday. I'm going to do whatever.
Right.
But Michael, where can we find you on the internet? What's the deal?
There's michaelsinowitz.com,
Okay.
and that has events and information about the book,
Right.
and that's definitely the best place. And you can contact me through that website,
Mhm.
also on Instagram.
Also.
Happy to have people contact me for sure.
Cool. Hell yeah. Well, thanks a lot for being on the show, Mike.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Cheers.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you
I'm
too.
sure it won't be the last, as you'll probably write more books about wine. How you doing? There's Lindsay Hoops right there. You should definitely talk to her.
Okay.
Interesting story with the whole Napa thing, kind of the
Mhm.
same thing that Julie is going through. Julie Cudmore, shout out to
Yep.
her. She put this together. Smith Madrone.
Right.
I shot guns with her son like 8 years ago.
Okay.
And then for some, now she's back in my life and I'm like, hey, whatever. And so she called me. I'm like, I shot guns with your son. She's like, what? I was like, yeah, a sniper rifle off the hill onto a fucking target down low. It was a crazy day of shooting. I'd never been in that kind of, but they were all about it. And I was like, this is nuts. But I saw her at Nimbash, and that's where we sort of whatever. And then she hit me up, email. So shout out to her. You got a good publicist on your hands.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
she's adopted me, so
she's good at that, man. And like honestly, her passion of just seeing people do well, with no kind of like she's not looking for anything back is very genuine to me, right? And there's very few people that do that,
right.
So that tells me that she has an inner monologue, right? And we'll end the show there, everybody.
Okay.
Sucio Talk Podcast. Check it out. That's it, baby.
Thanks.
That was a good one.
Thank you. Liked how it went all over the place.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's like
That's a conversation.
yeah,
Right.
and that's what it's meant to be, because I feel like we waste our time like scripting interviews, and because I was talking